Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we are now going to be diving into another quarterback battle. We just talked about Jayden Daniels officially winning the job for Washington. Now, in Denver, I kind of thought that we were going to be hearing some similar news after Bo Nix has been very solid throughout his first couple preseason performances. It sounds like in camp he's been doing pretty well for himself as well, and yet Payton is not ready to name a quarterback one. Right now it sounds like the race is between him and Jarrett Stidham. Zach Wilson is also on the roster, but and honestly didn't look horrible in preseason from what I saw at least, but can't imagine he's in that conversation really. And I was definitely surprised to hear that Payton outwardly was not ready to commit, considering I thought that Bo Nix pretty much locked it up with how he played. He ended up starting the game for Denver this past weekend. Now, ultimately, the Broncos were playing in week 2, and generally speaking here as well, week 2, typically we start to see less and less starters actually in there, but Nix at least, started the game, so it's not like he was facing the starters for Green Bay's defense, but he was at least, getting the top of the competition relative to what Jarrett Stidham was facing. And Stidham, when he came in, was just clearly not on the same level as Bo Nix. Nix at this point in this game, he was 8 of 9 for 80 yards and a touchdown. Could have had another touchdown pass in there as well, but we talked about this the other day, or just yesterday, where he had the play in the red zone where he ended up scrambling out of traffic, rolling out to his left, and just sort of lost the awareness of where the line of scrimmage was. Ran over the line of scrimmage before throwing it to Javonte Williams. I think that's an easy fix, and if it were, that's probably still an easy touchdown for him. So, again, a little bit of a learning curve here, but at the same time, Bo Nix was pretty special. And now at this point, we are looking at they have scored... The Broncos have scored on 6 out of 7 offensive drives with Bo Nix in the preseason so far, and I just definitely thought that was going to be enough, but clearly that is not the case, and they are going to continue to be evaluating throughout the course of this week and ahead of their final preseason game, which is going to be against the Arizona Cardinals later this weekend. So, to some degree, Sean Payton, he knows what he's doing, obviously, and he wants to keep the quarterback competition alive and healthy. Maybe he's seeing some things behind the scenes that, I don't know, maybe Bo Nix is being motivated by this competition, but I'm just surprised because I don't really think that the Broncos, they know that they're not really getting anything out of Jarrett Stidham. Now, they liked Stidham when they brought him in last offseason, keeping in mind as well with the fact that Russell Wilson was on his massive contract that he had just signed, and yet the Broncos were still willing to go out and give Stidham a fine enough deal, at least with a couple years on it. And I guess it was 2 years, $10 million. I thought it was more when I had first heard about it, but yeah, I guess 2 years, $10 million is all it was. So that's not even that much, belief, I suppose, in who Jarrett Stidham is as a quarterback, and yet they are still sort of flirting with the idea of having him be the week 1 starter as opposed to Bo Nix. Now, if there are things, again, behind the scenes that maybe are very concerning for Nix, you don't want to yank him in and out of the lineup, I suppose. But, again, for the Broncos, I just feel like there's not all that much that they're really playing for this season. I mean, Sean Payton definitely coaching for pride and trying to rebuild the system that is currently in place with the Broncos, but realistically, they're not going to be, at least in my opinion, a playoff contender. Now, last year, I know they were at least in the mix for a while, but I think that winning streak that they had, we talked about this before, the sort of unheard of, unrealistic expectation of winning the turnover differential really helped to sort of help them pull out some wins that I don't think is something that you can sort of chalk in for this upcoming season as well. And that's not to say that the Broncos can't still be a competitive team. Sean Payton is obviously a Hall of Fame caliber coach. So to entirely write them off, I think would be a little bit irresponsible. But you also look at the roster, and I just feel like it's pretty obvious that there are a number of real holes in this roster. So that being said, I feel like Bo Nix was sort of the easy decision for the Broncos to be able to throw him in and start to evaluate what the future looks like. At this point, Bo Nix, he's 24 years old, I believe. 24 years old, just turned 24 in February. That's not somebody that you really have to worry about, easing into the style of NFL play. He should be as ready as just about anybody else. Throughout the course of his career, he started something along the lines of 60 plus games over his college career, playing, 5 seasons, 3 at Auburn, 2 at Oregon, and, especially after last year being one of the best players in the country with 4,500 yards, 45 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, a 77.4% completion percentage. Like, that is kind of unheard of. I think the completion percentage was a record for a full season by an FBS quarterback, but, definitely fact check me on that if I'm off there. But Bo Nix is somebody that, some of the physical limitations could come into play. One of the biggest concerns with him being the fact that his arm isn't quite as strong as you would prefer at the NFL level. But I don't know how much they're going to coach Bo Nix to overcome some of these physical deficiencies. The big thing for him is he's so experienced. He's seen so many different looks. Put his mind to the test. Throw him out there. I don't really understand what the hesitation there, like what that would look like and why that would be. Especially because, I think they're fine, especially at the tackle position. Like, Garrett Bowles could end up being, and hopefully, I'm not getting too far ahead of myself saying this, but I think that Garrett Bowles is somebody, unless he already has, that could be, in contention for being an all-pro player at some point. There's honestly a chance at this point, a few years in, that he has made an all-pro second team in 2020. And last year was a nice bounce-back season for him as well, following an injured 2022 campaign. So, you feel pretty good about what you have as that blindside blocker. Just sort of let Bo Nix learn from there. And I'm sure that this is where we're going to be headed anyways, and in a few weeks, maybe even less than a week, a few days from now, that we could be seeing the announcement that Bo Nix has officially won that starting quarterback job. But I'm curious what it is that Sean Payton is sort of waiting on at this point, because, again, I don't really know what you are giving yourself unless very genuinely Sean Payton sees something in Jarrett Stidham that makes him think that they could win more games than anticipated, which I have a hard time believing that that's the case, at least from what I've seen of Jarrett Stidham in the preseason so far. But I don't know. Just a little bit of an interesting decision from Sean Payton to slow play this. Ultimately, I think we end up at the same place anyways, and we see Bo Nix be the starting quarterback for the Broncos. You know what? I'm kind of rooting for Bo Nix as well. Those Auburn years were pretty bad for him. He started as a true freshman, I believe it was, in 2019, and it was definitely underwhelming from what the overall consensus was, and I think that was sort of held against him into these past couple seasons at Oregon, where especially his final season, Dan Lanning had full confidence in Bo Nix doing just about anything, for that offense, and Lanning was vocal as well about having confidence in Bo Nix. He was very supportive of him through the pre-draft process, and I don't know, playing in the Pac-12, especially last year, for where the Pac-12 actually had, a really good season. Bo Nix was in the mix of all of that. Now, the losses to Washington definitely hurt to some degree. Maybe you try and make an argument that he can't win a big game, but also that was more so, especially the final matchup against Washington in the Pac-12 championship game. And that was way more about Michael Penix and his, crazy arm talent at the end of that game to put together an unbelievable drive. So I have confidence in Nix. I'm rooting for him because everybody has sort of written him off so severely already before he even really had a chance. But being the 6th quarterback taken in the first round, that'll definitely happen to you. And especially when Sean Payton's kind of setting him up for a little bit of a disaster just based off of the quotes that were coming out about Bo Nix reminds Sean Payton of Patrick Mahomes and all those stupid things that sort of came along the way there. But I do think that eventually, we're going to land on Nix and we're going to see where it goes from here. But I did just mention Michael Penix Jr., who Bo Nix faced off against in a couple times his senior year and in that Pac-12 championship game. And I want to sort of dive into Penix's situation in particular because we did not see him in the preseason game this past weekend. We will not see him again, and probably we're not going to see him again until, unless the Falcons have some garbage time this season. If not then it's going to be next year's preseason. And the Falcons said that they have seen enough out of Michael Penix Jr., so that's why they're shutting him down for the preseason. I have some doubts about whether or not that is actually the case, so we're going to be diving into that entire situation. But first, a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.